Hello, this is Ralph K. Ginorio. Welcome to the 21st video, adaptation of my historical background to the 9/11 atrocities lesson. We are at a moment when Hitler realizes that it's expensive and not easy to murder an entire race of people. Throughout the course of 1941, Hitler gained control of the largest Jewish population on earth, the Jewish Pale, in Western Russia, White Russia, the Ukraine, and Poland. And he used Einsatzkommandos, groups of death squads, to shoot these Jews in order to exterminate the Untermenschen, the subhumans, as he saw them. But his own men were committing suicide at incredibly high rates because they couldn't handle the strain that their job entailed, and since their job was aiming down their iron sights at civilians, it was understandable. Plus, bullets cost money. So Hitler needs a better solution. And what he comes up with is the final solution to the Jewish question. Now, the murder of the Jews is called genocide, which is a word invented after World War II to describe something that that didn't require a word before World War II. Genocide is the attempted murder of an entire race of people. We needed that word after what Hitler did. Before then, no genocide. And that's one way of describing what happened. In the United States, the most fashionable term for it is the Holocaust, which is the hottest part of the oven. And while the Holocaust certainly refers to a phase of this, my preferred name for this unnameable thing is the final solution to the Jewish question, and I'll tell you why. Euphemism is the use of soft language in order to shield the people participating in horror from the horror that they do, from the horror of life, from the reality of life that surrounds them. What I'm about to say, I take from the comedian George Carlin, who, while politically very different from me, like me, loved language, and loved it when words meant what they said and say what they meant. And euphemism is the opposite of all that. In World War I, a new combat condition developed on a large scale, where troops that were physically lightly injured or not injured at all were clucking like chickens or screaming or ripping their own nails out or gouging their own eyes out or standing and hopping around on one foot. They were gonzo, man. And the term was shell shock, because the human nervous system was not designed to put up with days and weeks of when could mean sudden, anonymous death by explosion, by shrapnel, by fire, by being trapped underground in your bunker, in your trench. And you never really hear the round that gets you. You hear the other round, and sometimes a shell lands right on you, but it's a dud. So, it's not a question of bravery. The nervous system simply snapped on some people, and this horrible condition, sometimes which lasted for the rest of their miserable lives, sometimes which was temporary and curable, plagued the veterans of World War I, and we called it shell shock. 2 syllables, each harsh to the ear, conveying something of the human cost and human misery of modern war. By World War II, we had become more bureaucratic, and we called the same condition battle fatigue. Battle fatigue. That's like I got tuckered out when running around the green. Battle fatigue. 4 syllables, not 2, and each syllable easier on the ear and easier to imagine. Oh, he's just tuckered out. He's got battle fatigue. It's still the same condition that shell shock was. Same condition, euphemistic name. By the time of Vietnam, we developed the modern Pentagon and the modern military-industrial bureaucracy, which still is with us today. Oh, thank goodness. And that same condition is called post-traumatic stress disorder. Post-traumatic stress disorder sounds like a fungal skin condition. Post-traumatic stress disorder. How many syllables is that? 16? It is so clinical and bloodless that it steals the suffering that should be there whenever you talk about what happened to that guy, that wonderful guy who went off to war a man and came back a vegetable. His sacrifice deserves more than the medical moniker post-traumatic stress disorder. It makes it easier for people to deal with it, but it shouldn't be easy to deal with in the first place. Hitler's people loved euphemism, because with euphemism you can get good little Germans who are going to do whatever you tell them to do, so long as you don't rub their nose in the misery that they're actually causing, to do precisely what you want them to do. So at the Wannsee Conference on 20th January 1942, Hitler's functionaries in the death business get together at a mansion outside of Berlin on a lakeside. And at the Wannsee house, they plan over snacks and drinks and all the banal banter that exists in every business conference ever, the final solution to the Jewish question, which of course is the murder of every man, woman, and child of Jewish descent that they can get their hands on, by any means, but by the best and most efficient industrial means. So at the Wannsee Conference, the blueprint for the final solution is established. And what is set up, like ogres and parfaits, but without the good, has a bunch of layers to it. So we'll start with the layers of the different types of camps and facilities that the Germans set up to process the product. To process the product. There's more euphemism for you. The former Secretary General of the United Nations Organization, Kurt Waldheim, the man whose voice is on the record on our Voyager spacecraft, which are now outside the solar system, the leader of proverbial mankind himself, in World War II helped schedule trains that included trains to the concentration, labor, and death camps. But it was all impersonal, see. We're moving product to processing centers, see. So this man gets elected by the oh-so-not-corrupt United Nations Organization to be their leader because he's from neutral Austria. Well, in World War II, his service to the German army was anything but neutral. Yes, he was just following orders. And yes, it would have been inconvenient and maybe deadly for him to step away from that duty. But it was the willingness to do their duty and not rock the boat that made such horror possible. And that's why I hate euphemism, because it makes it easy for people to bureaucratize evil and justify it and explain it away. There are three types of camps established by the Wannsee Conference, established during the final solution. The first are the concentration camps themselves. Now, concentration camps literally are gathering places. They're places where you concentrate and hold population, waiting for some form of other destiny. The British used concentration camps in the Boer War in the South Africa veldt of 1899 to 1901. They gathered the native Boer population and held them in barbed wire enclosures to keep them from supporting the Afrikaner commandos who were fighting the British Army. They concentrated the population. The same strategy was employed by us in Vietnam. They were called strategic hamlets. It was the same thing. You gather the civil population that the enemy guerrilla force depends upon, you put them behind barbed wire, you control them, you isolate the support from the enemy guerrillas and theoretically weaken the enemy guerrillas. Well, the Germans employ this methodology, but instead of gathering civil population that are supporting enemy troops in wartime, they gather their own civilian population, as well as the civil population of anyone they're able to get their hands on. So, concentration camps are gathering places. The first experimental test case camp was in southern Germany at a place called Dachau. At first, it was simply a gathering place for the undesirables before you do something more to them. Later, it became something else. Now, the greatest and largest simple concentration camps do not mean labor camps or death camps. It's used in common everyday parlance to describe where the Nazis killed people. Properly, they were killed in death camps or in labor camps, and many died in concentration camps. We're trying to be precise, so I'll be precise with my language. Concentration camp is a gathering place. The greatest concentration camps were the ghettos that the Nazis set up on a massive scale. This is bigger than anything that they did in the Middle Ages. Two major ghettos were set up. One was at Warsaw. And in Warsaw, what they did is they packed into a few small city blocks all the Jews they could find of the Eastern European conquests. Now, these Jews were just shoved in there without adequate water, without adequate food, without adequate housing, without adequate space. And the idea is you just keep packing Jews in there and they're going to die off. So there's going to be a natural die-off because of disease. They're crowded in there. They're filthy. They've got not enough water. They've got not enough food. This is going to bring malnutrition. So you gather your Jews into a ghetto like Warsaw. You keep them there, and a bunch of them are just going to die. They're going to wither and they're going to die. And that is intentional, and it's part of the deal. The showpiece, though, the equivalent of a Soviet tourist city, is Theresienstadt, which is an old ghetto south of the old Czech border where medieval Jews were kept behind this grassy green wall in their own separate neighborhood. And there were all sorts of sick, twisted propaganda campaigns, both for the International Red Cross and other international agencies that the Nazis dealt with to try to legitimize what they were doing, and Theresienstadt. Theresienstadt had brochures that talked about people choosing apartments with a south side view and window gardens. It was supposed to be the luxury resort concentration camp where the best of the best of the best of the Jews go. The cream of the crop. They had a mayor, a Jewish council. It was supposed to be a place where they were going to be living as second-class citizens, but still living. Outside the walls, they were stripped of their jewels, and they were told they'd get them back. And this is all a big joke, because inside Theresienstadt, especially when the Red Cross and the Swiss weren't there to watch over things, the Jews were crammed in just as they were in Warsaw. We're talking 5 to 10 times the number of people that should be in this area packed in. Without enough food, without enough water, without enough fuel for the winter, dying on the streets by the thousands in the apartments. Picture the worst image of poverty that you can. Put walls around it and crowd it beyond belief, and you've got a picture of Theresienstadt or Warsaw. In 1943, there is one of the few actions where Jews are able to organize resistance against the Nazis. It's the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising of 1943, not to be confused with the Warsaw Uprising of 1944, which involved the Gentiles of Warsaw. In 1943, there were rumors rife that the ghetto was going to be emptied and bad things were going to happen. Jews had been gathering whatever weapons they could make or find, and in 1943 the ghetto fighters rose up and they begged for help from the nationalist Poles, who refused it, in most cases. The Warsaw Ghetto rose up, and for days and weeks there was fighting, and ultimately the ghetto uprising was crushed. It's not that the ghetto fighters were braver than the other Jews that went more calmly towards their slaughter. It's that they had been there long enough to form relationships and associations and build up an organization that could fight back. They had the opportunity that so few Jews throughout Europe lacked, which was the opportunity to actually organize a resistance. Theresienstadt and Warsaw were ultimately emptied into the death camps. So that's the concentration camp. Next up, the labor camp. Thank you for your attention.